Sometimes the clearest turning point doesn't come when you realize you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it comes when you realize that the path you're on can no longer hold all of who you are. And that's what happened to me while I was studying in a graduate program in New York City. I loved the work, I loved learning, I loved the scholarly pursuit and the intellectual rigor of the program. I had worked hard to get there, and people around me believed I had a promising future in the field. Then one day, while I was sitting in the classroom, I had a realization that seemed to come out of nowhere. I could see the history, culture, religion, and literature of the people around me reflected in what I was studying, but I could not see myself. I was still passionate about the work, I was still committed to the scholarly pursuit, but suddenly I understood that something important was missing. The question was no longer simply whether I would continue forward toward a PhD. The deeper question was whether I could continue on a path that required me to leave part of myself out of the work. And that realization eventually led to a decision I had not planned to take. I left New York City and moved 3,000 miles across the country. Looking back, I can see that that was not abandoning my purpose calling. My purpose calling was becoming more specific. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. So glad you're here and listening into the podcast. Really appreciate you for helping the podcast get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally. And as you know, this podcast is for high achieving women who are ready to make clear, purpose aligned decisions about what comes next in their lives and careers. And we're in the midst of a series in which I have been looking back at significant career decisions and turning points in my life one at a time. I didn't have a master plan, and I usually could not see where the decision was leading. Looking back, I can see how one decision led to another and helped me understand more about purpose, identity, and the work I was meant to do. So at this point in the story, I had applied to a Master's of Divinity program at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and I had been accepted. I moved from Pennsylvania to New York and continued with the plan that had begun to form for me. I wanted to understand how PhD programs worked so then I could apply to one after I completed my Master of Divinity degree. I knew I was drawn to teaching and intellectual work. And even though I was in the master's program in a seminary, I didn't see myself in a pulpit. I saw myself in a classroom. But I didn't know exactly where that would lead. But I was becoming clearer that I wanted to teach at a higher level. And I learned that I would need a PhD. So once I began the program at Union, I started getting clearer about what I wanted to study. Oddly enough, I was drawn to the Hebrew Bible. I loved studying the Hebrew language. I was passionate about interpretation and about the process of engaging deeply with the text that was so connected to culture and literature and history and religion. So that became the direction I thought I would pursue in my doctoral program. The problem was that I still did not know how to get into a PhD program. So I began talking with professors and asking very direct questions. I told them that I wanted to pursue a PhD and study Hebrew Bible. And I asked, what do I need to do this? And they explained that I would need at least 3 years of biblical Hebrew, of studying biblical Hebrew on my application. The doctoral program would require proficiency in 7 languages, so I would be able to interpret the scholarly texts written in those languages. They included languages like Biblical Hebrew, Biblical Greek, Aramaic, another ancient language, and 2 modern languages like French and German. And the additional ancient language I eventually studied was Ugaritic. So they wanted me to understand that the language requirements made the program unusually long and difficult. They told me that there were very few African American women biblical scholars in the country at that time. They gave me every reason this would be hard. And I listened to what they said, but my response was still very simple. This is what I felt called to do, so I am going to move forward. I began taking Hebrew courses, the courses I needed to prepare myself. And a couple of years later, when it was time to apply to a PhD program, I decided I wanted to apply right there at Union. I liked Union. I believed it was a good place for me. Once again, I started talking with professors and telling them what I had planned to do. And once again, they warned me about how difficult the road would be. They told me that the woman who headed the Hebrew Bible department was extremely demanding and that her students often did not graduate because she didn't believe they had reached the required level of proficiency. And on top of that, the program only accepted 2 new students per year. Once again, the odds were not especially encouraging. And once again, I thought, I feel called to do this. I'm going to apply. So I applied to the program and I was accepted as one of the 2 students. Then, between the time I was accepted and the time I began the program, the professor that they had warned me about had retired. And so I entered the program with a different doctoral chair. I was now a PhD student in Hebrew Bible, and I was really enjoying the work. Across the street was the Jewish Theological Seminary. While Union offered the beginning classes in Hebrew, but I had to cross register to take courses at the Jewish Theological Seminary for more advanced study of Hebrew. So I had one advisor at Union and another at Jewish Theological Seminary, referred to as JTS. All right, so now I'm taking courses at both schools. And my program was so language intensive that there was not much room in my schedule for classes outside of the requirements. But I did have the opportunity to take a course called African Americans and the Bible. The professor who taught that course was Dr. Wimbush, an African American man who held a PhD from Harvard. And his approach to interpretation opened another way of thinking for me. The course examined not only the biblical text, but what people do with it and how communities interpret it and use it to form identities and to negotiate social power. I found that fascinating, and I loved the scriptural interpretation. I also loved thinking about African American culture. In that class, those interests came together in a new way. Still, my primary focus remained Hebrew Bible. I continued going back and forth across the street, attending the courses at JTS in addition to my courses at Union. My advisors were hopeful about my future. They believed I could become a leading African American woman scholar in Hebrew Bible. My friends and colleagues at Union were proud of me too. Many of them had taken the minimum Hebrew required and were happy to move on. But I, on the other hand, I loved the language, and when they saw me heading across the street for more, they just celebrated me. From the outside, the paths seemed to be coming together. I had been accepted into an extremely competitive program. I was studying something I cared about. My professors believed in me, my friends were proud of me, and I was doing work that challenged and energized me. Then one day, I was sitting in the classroom at JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, and something shifted. I looked around the room and I realized that, I was probably the only Christian in the entire building. Then I thought, I'm probably the only African American in this building. And as I looked around, I understood that the Hebrew Bible was connected to the other students' literature, history, culture, and religion. They could locate themselves in what we were studying. I suddenly realized that I could not. I thought, I am not in this anywhere. Then another realization followed. I didn't know very much about African American literature, history, culture, or religion. I was learning a great deal. I was developing expertise. I was becoming more proficient in the languages and texts I had chosen to study. But a significant part of my own identity was missing from the work. That realization sent me into what I would describe as an identity crisis. The difficulty was that I still loved Hebrew Bible. Nothing had happened to make me stop caring about it. I had not lost my interest in the language, interpretation, or the scholarship of it. Two things were true at the same time. I loved what I was studying, and I needed to find a way to bring more of myself into what I was studying. Around that same time, I was just walking down the hallway at Union when one of my classmates stopped me, and she asked whether I heard that Dr. Wimbush was leaving Union to go to Claremont Graduate University in California. And I said, no, I hadn't heard that. But before I had a plan, before I had spoken with him, before I knew any of the details, I heard myself say, I'm going with him. The words came out of my mouth almost instantly, and I had not worked through a careful decision making process before I said it. What I did know was that I could no longer ignore the need to incorporate my African American identity into my scholarly pursuits. Dr. Wimbush's work had shown me a way that my interest in biblical interpretation and my interest in African American culture could be held together. So I scheduled a meeting with him. I explained that I wanted to continue my studies with him. There was an obvious complication, though. He was a professor of New Testament, and my program was in Hebrew Bible, or what is sometimes called Old Testament. And I didn't want to change my focus to New Testament. I wanted to remain in Hebrew Bible. But I also wanted him to serve as my doctoral advisor. My thinking was that we could figure it out to make those two things work together. And he agreed. So I would apply to Claremont Graduate University, and I was accepted. My application was approved, and I made the decision to leave Union Theological Seminary, leave New York City, and move 3,000 miles across the country to California. This was not a decision to walk away from my scholarly pursuits. It was not a decision to give up because the program was too difficult. So it was neither of those things. Difficulty alone was not enough to stop me. I had completed the preparation. I'd been accepted as one of only two students, and I was succeeding in work I really enjoyed. The decision came from a different place. I wanted to pursue scholarship that included more of who I was. I wanted to follow the questions surfacing about my identity and my culture and how they belonged in the work I felt called to do. So I left a place where I was established and affirmed and moved across the country to continue that quest. And what I understand now, looking back, I can see that the calling did not disappear when I realized something was missing. It actually refined. I was drawn toward teaching rather than the pulpit. Teaching led toward doctoral work, and doctoral work led to Hebrew Bible, language, and interpretation. The deeper I went, the more I had to confront a question I had not known to ask when I began. Could this work hold my full identity? At the time, I experienced that realization as a crisis. I had worked hard to get into that program, and I loved what I was doing, and people believed in my future. It would have been easier if the work had simply been wrong for me. But that was not the truth. The work was not wrong, it was incomplete. There was not enough of me in it. That distinction matters to me now because sometimes a calling does not ask us to throw away everything we've already built. Sometimes it asks us to become more honest about what needs to be added, changed, or integrated. A real purpose calling does not require you to disappear inside the path. It may challenge you, it may ask you to study, prepare, stretch, or take a risk, but it doesn't keep asking you to leave essential parts of yourself outside the room. After I moved to California, I experienced the shock of leaving the East Coast and I grieved what I had left behind. In the middle of that adjustment, a sentence rose up in me that became stabilizing. Peace is not in a place. Peace is found in my true purpose. That didn't mean places don't matter. And it didn't mean the move was easy, because it certainly was not. It meant I was beginning to recognize a thread that was more consistent than any particular location. What had begun as restlessness was unfolding through a sequence of decisions: seminary, teaching, doctoral study, Hebrew Bible, a desire to integrate my spirituality, my intellect, my cultural identity, and my questions. I did not receive one dramatic announcement that explained my entire future. I received enough clarity to take one step, and then the next step showed me something more. That's one way I now understand a purpose calling. It may begin broadly and become more specific as you continue listening, listening to yourself, listening to your life. It may return as a question that will not leave you alone, or as a recognition that meaningful work is not yet whole. And although my story moved through seminary, biblical scholarship, and explicitly spiritual language, this kind of purpose calling is not limited to the spiritual or religious realm. It may lead someone toward a classroom, a clinic, entrepreneurship, advocacy, community, leadership, or institutional change. So the setting is not what makes it a purpose calling. What matters is the persistent inner signal drawing you toward a way of living, working, leading, contributing, while remaining more and more true to who you are. Now, what this might mean for you, you may be listening to this while doing work that is not entirely wrong for you. You may love important parts of it, be good at it, and have invested years in the expertise that brought you to this point. And still, something may feel incomplete. That can be difficult to name because we often expect career dissatisfaction to look more obvious. We think we'll know a path is wrong because we hate the work or can't do it well or have clearly failed. But sometimes the signal is quieter. The work may fit your abilities, but leave no room for your values. It may use your intellect, but not your creativity. It may allow you to make a contribution, but require you to keep an important part of your identity separate from that contribution. The question may not be, do I need to abandon everything I've built? A better question, I argue, may be, what part of me does not have enough room in the way I'm working now? For me, it was my identity as an African American woman and my desire to understand how that identity belonged in my scholarly pursuits. For you, the missing part may be different. You don't have to make a dramatic move simply because you notice it. Noticing is not the same as knowing what to do next. But it is worth paying attention when the same part of you keeps asking to be included. Your next decision may not be about rejecting your experience or your education or the work you've already done. It may be about refining the path so that more of you can come with you. And when I look back at this decision now, I can see another part of the pattern that I couldn't see then. I didn't have a master plan that led neatly from seminary to Hebrew Bible to Claremont. I had a series of yeses. I said yes to teaching. I said yes to doctoral work. I said yes to the difficult preparation required to study Hebrew Bible. And when I realized my identity was missing from the work, I said yes to the possibility of a path that could hold more for me and more of me. Each decision clarified something the earlier decision could not. That's one of the reasons I'm telling these stories one at a time. Meaning often becomes visible in retrospect. What I felt like a sudden change of direction may turn out to be the next refinement of a purpose calling that has been present all along. All right, so here's a question I want to leave with you today. What part of you, your identity, of who you really are, do you want to bring more fully into your work? You may not know yet what decision that question will lead to, but you do not have to leave yourself behind in order to keep moving. All right, I want you to keep that in mind. And if you have some questions, I want you to just reach out and message me at LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, or just follow me there for more content like this. And I look forward to you continuing along in this series. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.